Our first guest in this hour, Hans von Spakovsky. He's with the Heritage Foundation. He's their Election Law Reform Initiative Manager and their Senior Legal Fellow, here to talk about the impact on voting in coronavirus. Good morning to you, sir.
Well, great. It's good to talk to you again. Thanks for having me.
A recent op-ed of yours takes a look at this issue that's been rising in some states and some interest nationwide of voting by mail. You have concerns about that. What are those?
Well, the concerns are that absentee ballots or mail-in ballots are voted out of sight and outside of the supervision of election officials. And that means it's much easier for them to be stolen, to be misdirected by the Postal Service, and for pressure to be brought on voters themselves, intimidation and pressure. And though there are many instances of fraud involving absentee ballots, I certainly prefer voting in person. I think most people do too. Yes, we need absentee ballots for people who are physically disabled or sick, can't make it to the polls. But all mail elections are not a good idea. And there's no reason at this point to switch to having an all-mail election in November, given that we don't really know what the health conditions will be like at that time. And frankly, like a lot of people, I doubt we're all still going to be at home, still not back in school in November.
You've probably heard then many times that 5 states practice this. Those who are in the military overseas practice this. Some have other avenues too, and they seem, for the most part, to work. Why not apply this on a national scale?
Well, because the problems you see with absentee ballots will just be magnified. For example, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission files an official report with Congress every 2 years reporting on election results based on data they get from the states. And what they find from that is that absentee or all-mail ballots, millions of them in prior federal elections have been misdirected. In other words, they were mailed to the wrong address of voters. Many were rejected by election officials when they came back. Why is that? Well, you have to comply with certain requirements, fill out certain information with those kind of ballots, and there's no election official at your home to answer questions or tell you when you're doing it wrong, and those ballots get rejected. Literally millions of ballots. Also, the state authorities don't know what happened to them. They put them in the mail when voters requested them and then never saw them again. That's just one of the many problems with these ballots. The other problem, of course, is intimidation and pressuring of voters in their homes. There are also many instances of that occurring. I could cite you case after case of that. They're illustrated in the database we have at the Heritage Foundation. So again, just switching to all-mail elections, I just don't think is a wise policy.
But if in those instances that you talk about, was it ever enough to sway an election? So much so that it fundamentally skewed the results of an election, these things that you talk about on a grand scale?
Oh, yeah, I can cite you numerous cases. Anybody who doubts that, just take a look at the 2018 congressional races. Remember, there was one contested congressional race in North Carolina, the 9th Congressional District. That election was overturned because a political consultant hired there by the Republican candidate was going to people's homes and collecting their ballots, and in some instances, filled out the ballots instead of the voter filling it out, stole ballots, forged signatures. In another case in Indiana, to show you this is not a partisan issue, it's bipartisan. In 2004, the Indiana State Supreme Court overturned an election in a small town there. Why? Because of absentee ballot fraud and pressure, illegal pressure being brought on voters to vote a certain way, involving hundreds of ballots in a Democratic mayoral primary. That's just one of many instances.
Our guest with us until 9:30. If you want to ask him questions about this idea of voting by mail, the impact of coronavirus upon voting, 202-748-8000 for the Eastern and Central time zones, 202-748-8001 for the Mountain and Pacific time zones. You can tweet your thoughts at C-SPAN WJ, and you can also text us at 202-748-8003. I think you just brought up something that the Washington Post editors take a look at in their editorial this morning on this idea. They say this: states could put reasonable limits on, quote, ballot harvesting. That is when third parties collect and submit absentee ballots. But voter fraud of any type, they go on to say, is extremely rare in the United States.
Well, that depends on how you're looking at it. It could make the difference in close elections, and we have close elections all the time in this country. And there have been numerous cases of absentee ballot fraud, including cases, as we said, that have overturned elections. The other thing I think people need to keep in mind is that, look, Wisconsin just held a very successful election. People voted both by absentee ballot and they voted in person. At least 300,000 individuals voted in person. The state put in safety protocols, everything from social distancing in the voter lines to sanitizing of voting materials and voting booths. Basically, they took all the steps and more that retail establishments are taking right now for all of us who are continuing to go to grocery stores and pharmacies. And look, there was just a report, a medical report issued on the Wisconsin election saying that there's been no surge in COVID-19 infections in the state, and the turnout was almost equivalent to the turnout in the 2008 presidential primary when there was a very heated contest, as you know, between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So we have the ability to hold elections. Yes, you have to take security protocols and put them in place. But for people who want to show up at the poll, we have the ability to do that.